Welcome back. I'm Brandon, the HBAR Bull, and I do some contract work for the HBAR Foundation. Making Hedera easy to work with and build on for developers is of critical importance, and it seems like that's exactly what the mission of LedgerWorks is. Today, we welcome their CEO, David, and their CTO, Steve, to tell us about what they're building. Thanks for coming, guys.
Our pleasure. Appreciate you having us.
Great to be here.
Yeah, so let's just dig right into it. But before we get into LedgerWorks, can you just tell us a bit about your own backgrounds? David, we'll start with you.
Sure. Steve and I actually started our careers together in training programs at GE Capital. And just like today, I was on the business side in a management development program, and he was on a technical program. But from our start in financial services and the largest credit card companies in the world and all that, we diverged a little bit. And I ended up spending a good chunk of my career, most of it, in enterprise software services, more specifically security. So I've been in the cybersecurity world for over 20 years. I was a partner at Deloitte for a long time as a national cybersecurity partner there, even co-led their privacy practice. All Web2, all old school, I guess you would say, GDPR, that kind of thing. Most recently, I resigned the perfectly good partnership at Deloitte in an act of insanity by most people's measure, started a security software as a service company, and then ultimately sold that to a public company called Proofpoint. So for those that don't know, Proofpoint's like the 800-pound gorilla in email security and other areas. And so they ingest like 10 billion emails a day, right? Which is a meaningful percentage of global email traffic. And then it's threat intelligence, analytics, all the work you would do to try and detect threats. So that was kind of my, most recent time spent. And somewhere along that journey, Steve and I, who kept in touch always, started talking, always having a dream of doing something together. And that's where LedgerWorks was born. So I'll offer it up to Steve.
All right. Yeah, Steve, how did you find your way into the Hedera ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great origin story, Dave. Thank you. Yeah, right. So as Dave mentioned, we did grow up together at GE Cap. I spent a decade with them, and then just a great place to grow up when I was there. Kind of through the early '90s and such. It was the engine that was driving GE Capital's profits. And as a young technologist, there was nothing that we didn't have access to, because we were just driving the revenues as a business. Great place to grow up. And then I spent a year at Deutsche Bank. Quite a bit different experience than GE Cap. And then in '99, founded a .com, that was supposed to change the world, retire by 40, all that good stuff. Didn't quite work out that way. But luckily, at that same time, started a traditional systems integration business, working with very large enterprises, Department of Defense, really focused on finance, insurance, and then some interesting things like IED defeat and things like that, for about 7 or 8 years. So it's been a great experience. Worked that business for 20 years and then sold it in 2015. And now have a chance to, start this new thing with Dave. So we're super excited and great to share a little bit about what we're doing.
Well, it sounds like you guys have the perfect experience to amplify our ecosystem in Hedera. So we certainly appreciate you guys coming. And I also understand having that momentary lapse of reason and moving from, one industry to another or something along those lines, because I just did the exact same thing. And, I was doing fairly well in my prior career, and I had a few jaw drop moments when I told people that I was resigning. But hey, I'm happy now. So we'll keep driving forward and trying to make Hedera the best it can be.
Absolutely.
All right. So, David, can you explain to us what the goal of LedgerWorks is and, what drove you guys to build it?
Yeah, I think we started with a basic presumption that, the Web3 space as we got into, super exciting, love a lot of the intrinsic sort of aspects of Web3, but the underlying infrastructure, just didn't have the kinds of things your average developer would expect from the Web2 world. And that there was a real opportunity to mature the infrastructure space to accelerate the overall space. Not unlike what on other chains you might see with the Alchemies and Figments and Block Daemons and the work that's going on there. And, there really wasn't an equivalent kind of operating in the Hedera ecosystem. And we At the same time, we saw that, loved some of the dynamics of, the Hedera community, specifically the enterprise space, which we can get into in a second. But so we started out to kind of create, Steve, what's your tagline for the LedgerWorks space?
The data layer for the most mission critical Web3 applications on Hedera.
That was the sort of infrastructure space kind of targeted that we had. And since then, we've sort of continued to move up the stack, and we're looking at leaning into some, additional use cases that are a little further up the stack. But that's kind of our starting point of what we're about.
I gotcha. So, Steve, can you explain some of the products you already have that LedgerWorks offers to Hedera developers?
Absolutely. So, we got into the business as a traditional mirror. So, providing, really optimized, robust, reliable query against the Hedera, network data, and working with customers like Hashpack and Hashgraph Name. We're doing, a couple million queries a day, 2 to 4 million queries a day, supporting their customers. And what became pretty obvious to us is that there was a great opportunity to add additional capabilities in terms of notifications. And, given that we see every transaction that comes across the network, there's a lot of interesting things that people might want to know, both in the moment, like, hey, this thing was minted or this transfer happened, and also to build rules around looking at traffic through time, almost like you do with it a traditional financial services model where you're looking at stock returns in the moment. So we've got some interesting things built on our Sentinel platform, one which is support of ESG, which we can talk about a little bit later. But that's the idea. And as Dave mentioned, now we're going to kind of move a little bit further up the stack to have some more products really focused on security. And Dave, I'd love to talk a little bit about those as well.
Okay, I'm sure we'll get to it. But David, why did you decide to build your product suite for the Hedera ecosystem? And are you working with any other networks as well?
So, what drew us in, I mean, we could give the sort of Hedera, pitch on why Hedera is so great. From our perspective, we spent most of our career working with large enterprise customers, right? Mm-hmm. And we know what they require, we know what they expect, and those things still don't really exist in our ecosystem. So I think the enterprise orientation of Hedera was sort of the premier thing that drew us in. I mean, I love, I know Steve's very passionate on the ESG and the sustainability attributes, mm-hmm. and some of the other stuff, but building something robust for the sort of onslaught of enterprise customers was where we sort of were most excited. But of course, to keep it real, right? I mean, we need actually enterprise customers to be entering the space for that to make a lot of sense. And, I think one of the challenges we have in the space is that it's slower than I think a lot of us would like in terms of its sort of enterprise adoption. It's not the hype and bust of 17, 18, you know what I mean, in terms of enterprise expectations. But, I think when you ask the question about are we on other networks, I mean, those are the questions you have to think about. Do I need to move to other chains, be multi-chain? As an infrastructure play, I don't think we're drawn to other chains. But if we look at some of our upstream use cases, we might have a different answer to the question.
I gotcha. So, in a recent Twitter space that Hedera hosted, representatives from Google Cloud said they're focused on developing the tooling to help bring the next 10 million developers into Web3. Steve, how can large organizations work with smaller ones like LedgerWorks to help facilitate this migration? I guess this extends the other way as well. We had hgraph.io come on, and they're working on tooling for developers as well. How can you work with, single developers like Patches as well, to help facilitate this migration?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great topic, and I guess as we thought about it, it's really not necessarily a question of how do you, a large enterprise work with a smaller group like us, or vice versa. It's really how do you move from the Web 2 mindset to the Web 3 mindset. And so, I mean, it just so happens, as Dave mentioned, one of the things that drew us to Hedera was, this idea that it's enterprise scale and enterprise ready. And I think given that we spent the vast majority of our professional lives in large enterprises, that was something that we, really thought we could bring to the party. We've got a seasoned engineering team with deep familiarity with what enterprises need to feel comfortable, to launch into a new technology. And in addition to just the core services that we offer, that's another way that we can help, evangelize, put your hands on the monitor, come to Web3 on Hedera, to kind of bring them up the curve, and also give enterprises a place and a way to feel comfortable that they can bet a part or a significant chunk of their business, on Web3 and on Hedera.
Sure. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Now, you've already talked about some of the projects you're working with, but I'd like to, pull on this thread a little bit. What are some of the most interesting projects that you're working on that's utilizing your tooling? And this is a question for either of you. We'll start with David.
Okay, I think it's interesting, some of the unintended consequences of our infrastructure. A lot of people think of infrastructure and they really are oriented to us as a mirror. There's a couple of players out here providing, mirror services, and that's really the sort of table stakes base level of our infrastructure. Yes, we provide a robust, high throughput mirror that can scale and does scale. Steve mentioned that 7,000 TPS moments and things like that. But on top of that, the Sentinel product he alluded to is really interesting, and the consequences were really interesting, because as you're ingesting every transaction that comes across the ledger, and you're building a capability that now can monitor every one of those transactions and apply in real time and at scale tens of thousands of rules against that can take action, then that creates all these amazing possibilities. And what's funny is that a lot of the developers we talk to, we have to work with them to actually think about what they could do with that capability. So, I think the ESG one is a great example, right? Because it's not only applying rules that are monitoring transactions that are flowing across the ledger, but it's then taking actions that might build temporary repositories, pre-process data off of IPFS and ready it so that you could do real-time queries, and build essentially what we've done in the ESG domain data space is a set of domain-specific APIs that give real-time query access to what's actually distributed data that's scraped all across, not just Hedera, but IPFS and other sources. So that's really cool. On top of that, what got me very excited is, it's funny how you take this journey and you end up right back where you've sort of lived, which is the security space. And for me, it became so natural. We don't, if you look around at the security space in Web3 collectively, a lot of it's very smart contract audit oriented, right? And the idea that you could protect source code and then be secure is kind of a novel thought that 25 years ago was sort of what the security industry thought, you know what I mean, in Web 2, right? You had Microsoft hardening its code, and you had the idea that we'd stop a virus before it got on, all these ideas. And it turns out those things are necessary, but totally insufficient, right? And so you have a whole Web3 security space that's really at a very nascent stage, right? We've crossed the 3 billion in losses this year collectively on Web3. So, what's missing is this idea of monitoring, of anomaly detection, of all of that sort of layering on, which at least in some of the other Web3 layers, you have some things, right? You got Etherscan, who's going to tell you that code at least has been on a smart contract's been checked in and been verified, or, but in Hedera, we have very little security infrastructure supporting the team. And what's amazing about that is in Web3, you can do real-time incident response, right? Because of the nature of Web3, you have some things you can do around security that are way more interesting, cooler, more powerful than what you have in the Web 2 space, which can be tougher in certain ways. So, one of the things, back to your original question about projects that we're really excited about, is building that rule set sitting on top of our ingestion, our mirror, our sort of rules engine that can provide a security product for, not just, the emerging DEX or, DeFi space we have in our community, but also for people that are running, basic marketplaces or other kinds of tooling and coding. So anyway, that was long-winded, but, kind of you got hopefully a sense of the sort of passionate space I'm kind of thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're going to go from securing millions of dollars on the Hedera network to, in my opinion, trillions or even tens of trillions of dollars. So it's certainly something that's necessary. Steve, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just really echo what Dave said. That the more we spend in the space, the more we learn about it. And to just watch the rapid pace of innovation and investigation and exploration is just so exciting to be a part of. And at the same time, you know, you want to provide safety and guardrails and frameworks that allow people to do that in a safe and efficient and a manageable way going forward. So I think that's really what's got us most excited. And just I'll just mention again, since Dave mentioned it, you know, what we're doing in the ESG space with the HBAR Foundation is really, you know, kind of an offshoot of our Sentinel product. And what it's allowed us to do is create an ESG domain specific repository on the fly in real time, query optimized for people that are wanting to help save the world. So that's kind of cool too. And we could spend a whole hour talking about that. But.
Well, we can zoom out a little bit. You can talk about the future of ESG, but you know, what has you most excited about the Web3 space in general? And Steve, you can just keep going along that thread.
Yeah. I mean, I think just watching it happen is, you know, as Dave alluded to earlier, it's a very nascent space right now. Mm-hmm. Innovation is happening incredibly fast. And I think what Hedera brings to the table with HCS and native token services, as well as, you know, smart contract support, it just provides an incredible canvas for painting some really incredible Web3 pictures. And I think that's what's most excited about it. I mean, we're relatively old guys in this space, right? If you walk into the room, we're probably some of the only people, well, me, maybe not Dave, you know, with gray hair in the room. So it's a chance to relive that excitement of the Web 2 days of the early internet. Maybe not that old, but anyway, you know, I think that's what brings us to the space and gets us excited, and to be able to help and be on that journey with a bunch of really intelligent, smart, and people that are just looking for the next great adventure in this space. I think it really, you know, gets us up in the morning and takes us to work every day.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. You know, I was going to say it's about being on this journey, and it's been a blast for me so far, and I'm looking forward to what that looks like in the future. How about you, Dave? What are you most excited about in the Web3 space, just in general?
Well, you know, the idea of traditional enterprise sort of companies coming into Web3 has been like the little train that could, getting up the hill. And, you know, for 5+ years, people have been ready for it to happen, right? There was, you know, a whole expectation, you know, 5 years ago that it was going to happen. And I think, you know, if you look, we might not have been ready 5 years ago, honestly, in terms of the maturity of, but as you look at what's happening today, take Circle, who've brought USDC here. I mean, a big part of their strategic thrust is to create the payment rails that are going to make it safe for enterprises to enter. You see, you know, obviously a whole lot of the work that Hedera has been doing over the last few years, sort of readying the field so that an enterprise can safely enter this space. And a lot of our infrastructure work is down the same road. So, you know, when I look, it's not going to happen like there'll be some onesie twosie, but then at some point, you know, use cases will emerge, and there will be this sort of transition of, you know, enterprise America into certain use cases that will expand over time. And when those floodgates start to open, right, the needs from our community to support that are going to be so vast, so great, right? Not just in the tooling and infrastructure, but on so many dimensions of areas where the enterprise, you know, if I think about like that last thought on the security space, I came out of an area where when I started in security, there were maybe 4 companies. And now if you go to one of those conferences, there's 4,000 plus meaningful security companies. But in talking to many of them, none of them have really done anything in Web3. And they haven't done anything in Web3 because their Web2 enterprise customers haven't been asking them to. Sure. But the moment we start to see enterprise customers entering Web3 saying, where's this and where's that, and how come I can't do this? You are going to see sort of an exponential sort of takeoff. That, you know, I'm waiting for that little boulder to tip down the hill and snowball. Is it a snowball? And that's kind of what I'm really excited about being here and witnessing. You know, when that takes off. So.
I love that vision, and it certainly sounds like it's in line with what Hedera is thinking as well. David, you know, how can developers reach out to you that are interested in building on Hedera and utilizing your products?
Yes, Steve. I mean, I think LedgerWorks.io you can just sign up and start using, you know what I mean, instantly, right? So we've got a self-service portal for a lot of our basic products, right? The mirror, the basic reporting. So that's a great place to start. But you know, we're in a high-touch world. You know, it's probably our enterprise background. So you know, if they start from there or put an inquiry, we pretty quickly move to Slack channels, and you know, obviously we have a Discord platform, and so you know, it's a high-touch space. So you know, one of the things exciting, as I mentioned earlier with the Sentinel product, is we have to end up in a conversation with our customers to stimulate the kind of thinking that says, oh, what they can actually do with some of this.
Sure.
So, you know, we have working sessions on the security product, designing the security product that we're building fit for use for specific customers, right? So we really do look to be actively engaged with our customers. And so starting point will be the website, but from there, you know, lots of channels for communication.
Oh, good stuff. All right. So, Steve, before we let you guys go, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to pass on?
Yeah, I think, you know, as Dave mentioned, we're always looking for folks to talk to help us, you know, get smarter along with community writ large, you know, as we embark on this, you know, new security roadmap and associated products. You know, if folks have interest, give us a holler. We'd love to talk to them and love to, you know, kind of flesh out, as you said, on that journey together. You know, as we ride off into the sunset, that'd be a beautiful thing.
All right. Thank you, Steve. So, Dave, anything else you'd like to pass on?
Wow, that's always so dangerous, right? As you figured out during this, I can get on a roll. So I appreciate you, you know, courageously and generously continuing to sort of turn to me and give me an option to start. And so
All the time in the world.
Begin with, well, it's about a 20-minute talk, and I'm just kidding. This has been great, and I appreciate all your time and interest.
All right. Well, guys, best of luck. I really appreciated the talk, and we'll talk to you later.
Right. Thanks a lot.
Okay.